All right, welcome to stream recap number 2. I'm still working on the barrel. For this stream recap, basically I just kind of did a little bit more work, kind of brought us a little bit closer to a final product. But I'm still not quite done, so that'll be done on the stream. I also want to say I actually reached 300 subscribers as I was streaming, so that's pretty awesome. This is a lot of fun. I'm going to keep doing it. And this is going to be great. We're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to learn a lot of new things and try a bunch of stuff. Without further ado, let's look at the model. You can see that it's actually starting to look pretty good, like a barrel. So some of the changes I made was I shifted up the top band, I guess. I added some bolts, which I think I'm actually going to modify because I'm not 100% sure on the way I did it. I might need to make some changes, and actually, now that I actually see it, yeah, I'm just going to throw those in there. So these are the high resolution version. Let me just give them a metal material. Yeah, that's much better. And then also, I just kind of sharpened up some of these lines. And what you may not notice here, just by looking at this, is that these are actually entirely new objects. So the idea of this is they're going off of a very different way of handling high resolution. And so I can bring the detail down and you can see this is what I have, or I can bring it down to 1 and this is what I have. So it's just a different way of handling this sort of thing. And so this is going to help us create our final object, which is going to be a combination of textures that make it look a lot more like this. Although, you know, when I look at this, I think to myself, like, we probably have to modify a little bit of the colors, of course, because as good as this looks, it's not finished. All right, so let's look at how I handled the bands. All right, so here you can see me adjusting the top one and deleting the bottom one so I can mirror it. I scaled it up along the normals just so I could get a little bit more space to work with. And here I'm just using that same radial sculpt method to just sort of simplify the process so I can get the result I want without having to worry too much about sculpting over different areas multiple times, basically. And here I'm just sort of starting to go through and add a little bit of detail, giving it sort of that look. But then I decide to restart over again because I guess I just wasn't really liking the way it was looking. So here, again, I'm just gonna kind of go around and give it a bit of a bevel, modifying the shape of it to make sure that none of the planks are coming through. And then just going around and modifying, for example, the base down at the bottom there, scaling it up again, and just sort of going through and, again, adding some of that extra detail and smoothing it out. Because as much as I want this to sort of be beveled, I don't really want it to be 100% perfect. I just want it to be, like, pretty close. I shrank down the tops there just to change it up. All right, so next I worked on smoothing out the top and the bottom bands on the barrel. I don't want them to be quite as sharp as the wood so that we can differentiate them. The metal is basically going to be pretty rough and kind of worked. So I just don't want any of those sharp edges there necessarily. Here I move on to the top one. All right, so that one was pretty straightforward. I just kind of made some adjustments and went through and sort of smoothed out some of those details. The way I'm thinking about this is that once I'm actually adding the color and going through and texturing it and that kind of thing, that a lot of the details are going to be brought out by that material itself. In addition to that, like I said, I wanted to differentiate it from the sort of sharp edges that the wood has. I guess just to sort of separate it so that, you know, it still has that sort of worked sort of feeling to it, that it has a bunch of dents in it and it isn't the most perfect, like, pristine metal, but it's also just not quite as sharp and as rough as the wood is. All right, so let's look at how I created the nails. So I started here just by creating a single nail. I was giving it a little bit of a bevel so that I could create the shape that I wanted before I actually went in and I started sculpting it. And then I just went in and I started sculpting it, beveling the bottom so that I could separate it from the bands, and then giving the sculpt itself that same sort of texture as the metals mostly had, just smaller detail though. And as you can see, in this case, it's basically just I'm just repeating the same thing over and over again on the different objects. And the reason why I'm doing this is so that I can have a couple different nails that I can rotate around and change so that when it actually comes time to put them around the object or put them around the barrel, they'll just sort of sit right where I want them to, and I can just sort of rotate them and they look different even though most of them are repeats of one another and that kind of thing. Alright, so at this point I just kind of rotate them. I don't really know the rotation that they need to be, so I'm just kind of figuring it out. And then I add a particle system, and what I'm going to do with this particle system is I'm going to set it to a hair particle system and limit the emission to the vertices around this circle. And because of that, what's going to happen is all of these objects are going to appear around the circle. So currently it's just repeating one, and so I put all of them inside of a collection, and now they're all differentiated. So the other thing too I noticed is that you can see that they're kind of tilted at an angle, and what I noticed that was that the origin of the circle going to each vertex acted as kind of like a normal for which direction that these nails had to be facing. So you can't quite see it, but you'll see me kind of adjusting so that I can get the right angle so that they don't really appear like they're rotated in the wrong way. And just creating two more circles that on the top and the bottom that I can sort of adjust so that I can have more nails on there. And I'm just you saw it there. I was just adjusting it and adjusting the particle size so that those nails were quite a bit smaller. Alright, yeah, so those are the nails. The reason why I think I did something wrong there was because I created high resolution nails, but it didn't actually create anything that I could have as like a low resolution nail, which is something that I am going to need for the final mesh. So ultimately, that's kind of a problem, and I think I just kind of have to. I just kind of have to deal with it. Like I'm just gonna have to solve that problem and handle it. All right, let's continue on to probably the simplest part of this. It's gonna be a repeat from last one. I'm basically just going through and sharpening up and deepening all of the cracks along the side, and sharpening up all of the wood grain. Yeah, this is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just gonna sort of fast forward through this and you can watch through it. So I guess after that, let's continue on to the retopology phase, which was a little bit more experimental. I tried different things to see what I would probably need, and I think the solution that I came down with was pretty simplified geometry, although I'm already looking at some of this stuff and thinking to myself, well, I can do a better job. So here you can see me taking all of the nails and putting them all into one object, or all one collection rather. And then here I just try and kind of handle the instancing and cancel it so that I can just merge them all into one object and have just one single object with all of the meshes in it. Here I'm starting to create the mesh for the actual barrel, and I'm using the mesh that I had left over from the start of last episode, and just kind of lining up the lines of the edges there with the barrel. Here you can see me moving them around. I think I decide against this later on. And here I'm just trying to bevel some of these edges to see if I can give them a little bit more of a dynamic, like crack, so that there's actually something there to represent the crack rather than just a texture. But I think I'm just going to go with the texture. I don't really see any issue going with the texture. And here I'm trying to create it all as one mesh, but I actually decided against this because I felt like it would be much easier to control everything if I made it multiple meshes. So that's one thing. Sometimes you can get away with having it all be one mesh, and sometimes you can't get away with that, and so you basically just have to make those changes. So here I'm actually starting on the bands. I'm making modifications to the bands, and I decide to shrink wrap all of my objects onto the surface of the sculpt meshes. And what this is going to do is it's going to just project all of the vertices onto the sculpt mesh. As you can see, I'm having some issues with the barrel, and it just means that I have to scale out some of the vertices there. Alright, so here I'm actually trying to create the meshes for the nails. And this is why I think it is going to be a problem, is because when I created all of these are all basically the same object, but decimated. And the problem with this is that I'm going to have to go through and UV each and every single one of those, and I really don't want to. I have no problem just going back and redoing it because it only took a couple seconds to actually get it going properly. And here I'm sort of finding out that there's like a bit of weird geometry going on. I'm not really sure why that is, but for some reason... Oh, and at this point, I get congratulated on the fact that I'm at 300 subscribers now, which is excellent. I'm really happy about that. And yeah, so after sorting that out, I just start creating some new geometry to better accommodate the shapes that I'm looking for. Because oftentimes it isn't good enough for you to just have geometry over the mesh. Sometimes you actually have to model the geometry that you need. And here I think this is a bit of a mistake the way I set this up. I'm thinking about changing this so that it's a little bit more better suited for the part of the mesh that it is essentially. And then here I applied a multi-res and I started shrink wrapping the object to the sculpt mesh. And so that's how I got a lot of the detail onto the object. And I'm just going through and sculpting in all the areas, just very simply sculpting them in so that when they project onto the surface, they actually have an easier time finding the surface that they need to find. I'm doing the same thing here because you get a lot of faceting if you don't do this. And yeah, there it is. So I started just creating some base materials to separate these out. You can see how different it looks now, just how much better it looks. Especially considering that the screen space cavity map basically is just doing a lot of the work for us. It's giving it that sort of pop where it's dark in the cracks and like bright along the edges of the mesh. And yeah, so that's basically it. So I'm actually pretty happy with the result here. I'm not really totally worried about a lot of the mistakes I made because those are pretty easy to fix. Going back to the mesh that I showed at the beginning, two differences that you'll see is that the tops and the bottoms of the actual planks, the final mesh for the planks, has been scaled in. And the reason why I did this is because if you look at the render and you look at the object as it is right now actually has a better connection at those two top bands. And the second thing I did is I rotated those nails around so that they're in the middle of the planks rather than right at the corner because it doesn't look right at the corner. That's basically it for that one. I'm going to be working on it more, twitch.tv/supertrooper. I'm going to be putting up a schedule so that you can actually see when I'm going to be streaming. And I'm probably going to be streaming more, probably once on a Wednesday and once on the weekend at some point. But yeah, that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you're excited for the modeling tutorials because I am very excited. And if you like this video, consider subscribing, leave a like, and comment if you have something to say. Anyways, I'll see you next time.
Super trooper, super trooper, super trooper, and he sells soup.